Support for Iowa Catholic Radio and the Uncommon Good provided by Mercy College of Health Sciences. Learn more at mchs.edu.
Welcome, folks, to the Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr. Every week, diving deep into the truth of Catholic social teaching and restoring all things in Christ.
The Uncommon Good is on the air. I'm Bo Bonner.
I'm Dr. Bud Marr.
We're coming to you from these United States of America, here in the middle of the country, where if you're probably listening at the State Fair. Let's be honest, that might be happening. But if it is, it's the Iowa State Fair, here nestled between the two rivers of Des Moines and Raccoon. And that's where every delectable dessert you're eating is sourced from those rivers, I believe. Well, that might not be true. This is the radio. We got to be careful what we say. But I like to say that spiritually they're sourced from these rivers. This is the Uncommon Good. I'm Bo Bonner with Dr. Bud Marr here. Bud, I am the Senior Advisor for Mission Initiatives and the Director of the Center for Human Flourishing here at Mercy College. What do you do at this here place?
I'm the Dean of Liberal Arts and Sciences at the college, and I hope politicians are not ruining your state fair. No.
Like with their rapping, isn't that?
They're rapping and pretending like they like certain foods. No. I feel like we're pretty hospitable to the politicians. I know more are walking our grounds this year.
Yeah, I don't know if it is anywhere near what 2016 was, like the first year I was here in Des Moines.
Yeah, I should say this time of year. I don't know how it compares with previous state fairs, but
I landed in, it would have been here about 5 or 6 months. That first fair of 2016 was insane. So not only is the Iowa State Fair a lot bigger than the Kansas State Fair, which was where I was most recently residenced before coming to Iowa, but of course with primary fiascos and stuff like that, that was quite a trip, man. To experience that the first time.
Well, I feel like it's always a trip. There's these great moments. The one that I saw this week that made me chuckle is DeSantis I think they were frying deviled eggs. And so there was this assembly line, and the politicians need to be a man of the people or a person of the people. And so he was helping put the popsicle sticks into the eggs, and he looked incredibly uncomfortable. But someone walked by and they're like, just here for the eggs. They didn't want to do the photo op thing or whatever. So that made me laugh.
I appreciate just here for the eggs, man or woman. I don't know who said that, but I sometimes feel that about life. I'm just here for the eggs. Why are you making this about something else? I will make this about something else real quick, which is Mercy College of Health Science that underwrites our show. I want to say that we're the wonderful state fair corn dog of health science colleges, which is actually a bad metaphor because I know that they're telling you should not eat those. But either way, underwritten by Mercy College of Health Sciences, mchs.edu. Thank you for underwriting our show.
Yeah, and actually a little PR for the college, a little more, is if you are looking for a place to park and then ride to the state fair, we have one of those parking stations nearby the college.
That is
so
true.
If you park along, am I allowed to say this on air?
I don't know, and I don't even know if it is depending on when they're listening. I don't know if it's even helpful.
If you exit 6th Avenue and you grab the bus spot there or whatnot, you could just stop and visit the college.
Yeah, you can at least look at the college physically as you park. I think that's what Center Street. Take the bus over, which I have to admit, my kids, that was their favorite ride. I think was actually the bus ride. So,
well, it's great for you and me because sometimes when we go to the fair to represent Iowa Catholic Radio, we've got meetings here at the college.
Yeah, we
can just jump on a block.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that you all had a chance to see us out there. Depending on who's listening, it was great to see you if you happen to be there. But it's always a nice, crazy time to be at the fair. Another sort of wonderful, it's like we won a prize, we broke enough plates, Bud, to get a prize, is our guest today for the show.
Yeah, we're really excited about the guest. It's someone who I've read over the years, and so just an opportunity on the show to be able to speak to David Fagerberg. He taught for a time at Notre Dame. These days he's a professor emeritus there, where if you're familiar with the academic world, that's the primo, because you're still doing what you love, but you don't have a 3-3 course load. You're just sort of in the halls. If you want to pick up a class, but Dr. Fagerberg has written a wonderful book, The Liturgical Cosmos, the world through the lens of the liturgy. I can't talk right now. The Liturgical Cosmos, out by Emmaus Academic. Great book. So we're excited to talk to Dr. Fagerberg today about the liturgy.
This is the Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr will be back speaking with Dr. Fagerberg right after this. We're back with the Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr joining you this week. Thank you for listening to the show here on Iowa Catholic Radio, whether you're listening over the airwaves of Iowa Catholic Radio, if you're listening online at iowacatholicradio.com, the Iowa Catholic Radio app, or all of our good podcast listeners. Thank you for listening to the show. We have a very special guest today for the show, so I'm going to throw that over to Bud to introduce him.
Yeah, we're honored to have on the show today Dr. David Fagerberg. He is the Professor Emeritus of Liturgical Studies at Notre Dame University. He's written extensively on the liturgy, but his most recent book is The Liturgical Cosmos, the world through the lens of liturgy. Dr. Fagerberg, thanks for being with us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So I'll start the conversation today with the title. You know, I find even in some Catholic circles that sometimes we see the liturgy as sort of preparation for the real work, right? That it's sort of the practice until you get to the important part. But as you say in your title, the subtitle there, The World Through the Lens of the Liturgy, just the very title of the book makes me think, and in reading it before the interview today, that the liturgy is more foundational than sometimes we give it credit for.
I would like to argue that, yes. I've been a year retired, but I still imagine my old lectures in the classroom. And one of the ways that I often began my course on liturgical theology was with two anecdotes. One was from somebody who first heard that I was coming to teach at Notre Dame, and he said, "Oh, and you like liturgy, wait till you see a football game there." I thought, well, yes, I understand your point. There's ritual, there's repetitive, traditioned behavior. The second anecdote was I was standing in line for commencement one day. We were faculty all in our cap and gowns, and the band was playing the march. And the person behind me, knowing that I worked in liturgy, said, "You must like this sort of thing." I thought, yeah, that's it. The squirrel, the shiny object, the thing that attracts one's attention is this kind of fooling around. A Anglican divine, Dean Ing, was once asked whether he was interested in liturgy, and he replied, "No, and I don't collect stamps either." So I think it's been my career to try to push liturgy into a more significant place in our lives. You can look at a window, or you can look through a window at everything that's outside it. And I know that there's reason to look at the liturgy. There's a whole profession. I once belonged to that guild. It's important to do that historical ritual studies, look at the liturgy. But I've always been more interested in looking through the liturgy at what? Well, turns out to be the whole cosmos.
Yeah, and on that note, I was thinking back to as I read your book. I mean, it's a beautifully mystical sort of spiritual reflection on the liturgy and its place in the Christian life. I know the most recent Pope preceding Pope Francis, Pope Benedict XVI, he actually at one point talked about the crisis that we face in the church today is very much rooted in a crisis of the liturgy. What do you think he might have had in mind, or do you see sort of that? Would you kind of concur with that outlook? In what ways are we facing maybe a crisis in liturgy? And I guess what sparked that thought for me as you were speaking is you were talking about these ways in which we view the liturgy as sort of like something we look at. And I feel like something that we've sort of lost is there's been so much conversation about liturgy in recent years that maybe in earlier times, liturgy was the water that you swam in. But we maybe, especially those who have more theological foundation, like when we go, we're prone to critiquing or observing things rather than sort of entering into it.
Yes. I'm always reminded that when the collected works of Ratzinger, Pope Benedict Emeritus, was set up, the first volume released at his request was volume 11. We're going to start with 11. What happened to 1 through 10? Volume 11 is his collected works on the liturgy. That was very dear to him, and he wants it to bring forward first. He wrote a book titled The Spirit of the Liturgy, using the same title as the one written by Romano Guardini, because he wanted to ask how the letter and the spirit grasps us. It's easy enough to get involved with just the letter. You can sleep with a book of canon law under your pillow. You can rummage through the rubrics constantly. But to get into the spirit of that liturgy, that requires something more. And I think it requires a capacitation of the person, which is why my work has run parallel to talk about liturgical asceticism and now liturgical abnegation. You must do certain things to prepare to become a liturgist. The liturgist isn't just the music director or the priest or the cantor. Each person is intended to become a liturgist. You're baptized into being a liturgist at the sacrament of baptism. That kind of approach reflects the thinking of the two guys who were most influential on me. One Catholic, Benedictine named Aidan Kavanagh, who said that liturgy is the place where the church transacts its faith in God. And he talked about liturgical theologian being Mrs. Murphy. There's a secondary theologian. I got a paycheck for that over many years. But the secondary theologian who sits in an office and reads books is one thing. Mrs. Murphy is a primary theologian. So he talked about a theologia prima. The second influential person was an Orthodox theologian, Alexander Schneemann, at St. Vladimir's. And he spoke about liturgy being the ontological condition for theology. It was the locus theologicus par excellence. So liturgy is a matrix of theology happening. And when you go in it and step out and step back in again and step back out, this is what the liturgist's life consists of. Every eighth day, step back into the liturgy and then bring that liturgy back out into the world. That requires a change of heart, a lifelong, constant conversion. So instead of just talking about you must like these sort of shiny things, I think that liturgy should pick up and create a person. And the person is therefore able to commit liturgy in a new way. I wanted to title one of my books, the early one on Theologia Prima, now it lost it. Was going to title it a rendezvous with God. When the two lovers agree to meet someplace, this I thought is what liturgy is. The lovers have agreed upon a meeting place. Be here, 11 o'clock, Sunday morning.
Well, on that Schneemann type note, I actually looked at one of your former books to prepare for today's interview, and you gave a very good definition that I'm going to say on air and then hope to unpack a bit. Your definition of the liturgy is the perichoresis of the Holy Trinity, canonically extended to invite our synergistic ascent into deification. Now, 4 of those words would win you Final Jeopardy some years. Lucky for us, kenosis is one that we actually have talked about quite a bit on the show, and I hope our audience is familiar with, because we actually bring it up a lot. The Christian leadership should look like kenosis, like the self-emptying, the pouring out. We can talk about that. But actually, one of my favorite words to say and ponder about is perichoresis. And I know that people will go like, well, why don't you just translate that into English instead of saying the Greek word? But there's a way in which English doesn't quite capture what we're trying to get at. So when you say the liturgy, like, again, both the Schmemann type point and then building on what you just said about lovers rendezvousing at a particular meeting point, what does it mean for the interpenetration of the life of the Trinity to come into our life during liturgy?
I think it's correct that sometimes it's fun to use the Greek word not to show off, but because then you have a empty boxcar that you can fill with the freight
Nice.
you wanted to carry. And the perichoresis was a term that appeared in my readings about the Trinity, and I thought if I want to make the definition of liturgy as large as possible, that's probably where I'll have to start, is with Trinity. Turned out that perichoresis was originally used in Christology to talk about the relationship between the two natures in Jesus, and after it earned its chops there, then it was applied to Trinity. It does have to do with the sharing, making room for one another. And the Trinity overflows itself. Some of the fathers speak about the creation of the world this way. The love that flows between the Father, Son, and the Spirit is like the water swirling around the bathtub when you were a kid until you spilled over the tub onto the floor. And there comes the Big Bang. So the creation of the world is an overflow. It's God beside himself with love, something beside himself to love, something that would love him back again. That means the creation is done by the flow of the agape downward. Then Eucharistia is supposed to return flowing upward. And so that's the cycle. That's a liturgical cycle. You've heard of the water cycle in elementary school biology class. Well, this is the Eucharistic cycle, the liturgical cycle. The agape of God descending and inviting our being raised up. That whole thing is hierarchy in action. And that's another word which I've been trying to recover. So far, nobody's noticed, but the idea that Dionysius meant, he's the one who created the word. He says that the goal of a hierarchy is to enable beings to be as like as possible to God and to be at one with him. So when people ask me if the Catholic Church is hierarchical, I always answer, I hope so.
Right. Right.
I hope we're not just killing a Sunday morning. I hope that it's a society that has God as its leader, and it causes members to be images of God, and it uplifts to imitate God as far as possible. I'm reading quotes from Dionysius' Celestial Hierarchy.
Well, and this to me connects back to how you start this book. So that kenosis word, the self-emptying, we've actually been doing a reading, an on-air reading group, as it were, with St. Augustine on his Confessions. And so I think about Augustine's letter to Proba, like to me, one of the best ways he talks about what prayer is about. And he goes, prayer is actually enlarging, as it were, our heart so that we can receive gifts from God that are too large for us to currently receive. But how do you enlarge your heart? Well, you largely empty it. And so you talk about liturgical asceticism not as earning, as it were, a spot in the pew, but if this, and I love how you put that, if the liturgical cycle, which is something like the water cycle, is to be enacted, it's not that we have to gain a certain amount of things or experience or even knowledge. It's actually we have to empty ourselves enough to be a part, to be taken up in that liturgical cycle to the Trinity, which I think makes all the sense of the world why you start your book from that angle.
It's so. I think that asceticism is the cost. It's what's required. And that makes sense not only with God, but in other relationships. If you want to love your wife, you can't start by strutting and exhibiting pride. You realize what a gift it is that she's loved you. There's a return commitment that comes out of being obliged, being given a sense of obligation. The ascesis, originally the word means a discipline, and it was used first of athletes. Here comes the month of May, and the baseball players will go down to Florida for their spring ascesis. They go into their training. Then the philosophers used the term to talk about the formation of the interior person and moral behavior. Well, the Christians used the word ascesis to name those spiritual athletes, the ones in the desert, the desert fathers and monks. And they went into the desert to carry out an experiment on what it cost to give a heart to God. Well, here's what we have to be rid of: pride, envy, lust. So the ascetical part, it does concern actions of the body, but I find I'm probably wrong in not giving adequate stress to that. But I find that the fathers are talking about changing the vices and virtues within a person. As I would try to drive it home to students, the problem is not money, sex, or beer. The problem is avarice, lust, and gluttony. Asceticism deals with the heart, deals with spiritual things: avarice, lust, gluttony. How can I confess God as sovereign Lord so long as I'm making other things lords of my life? My self-esteem, my self-will, my self-love, my accomplishments in the world. So I do think that there's this connection of asceticism and liturgical identity.
Yeah, Dr. Fagerberg, you talked a little bit about being precise in how we use terms, and mentioned, hierarchy and sort of what the original meaning of that word was. Another point in the book where you do this sort of thing is you talk about the word liturgy itself. And I know, like in theological education today, a lot of times it's talked about how liturgy is a work of the people. But I feel like in some of those conversations, it actually cuts against the grain somewhat of what you were saying in the book. So today, sometimes we say a work of the people, and that means as many people as possible should have like some designated role in the liturgy. You define it precisely as a work done by a few on behalf of the entire people. So, for instance, like the priesthood, by its very nature, has like sort of a selective quality to it. Could you kind of unpack that part of the book and the root meaning of the word liturgy, and sort of like what we can draw from that idea?
I think that it was appropriate at the time to have the laity be more involved in liturgy. I'm not one to refight those liturgical range wars.
Sure.
I think that was appropriate. Where I think things went a bit astray was a sensation that the liturgical movement was an attempt to move the liturgy. Somehow I always had that impression, and it's like a football on the field. I guess I'm still thinking about that. You're a liturgist. What do you see this football game? If you have this football on the field, then the traditionalists want to move it 10 yards one direction, and the progressivists want to move it 10 yards the other direction. It wasn't until I began reading the pioneers in the liturgical movement, and I'm referring right now to Virgil Michael, to discover that they said the liturgical movement is us moving closer to the liturgy. We stand so far away from it that we can't be warmed by this blazing fire. And so the liturgical movement is moving towards the liturgy, and then discovering that it doesn't just belong to the experts or to the priests and deacons. It belongs to all the baptized. They are liturgists. So it's true that the Greek means laos and ergia, has to do with people and work, but it means a work for the people. Liturgia meant the work that somebody did on behalf of the community in which he lived. Paying your taxes was called the liturgy in ancient Rome, or paying for the games in the Colosseum, where it was maybe one's contribution or liturgy. The phrase you quoted, I actually pick up from Schmemann, the work of a few on behalf of the many. But the same thing is said in the Catechism. Here in 1069, the word liturgy originally meant a public work or a service in the name of and on behalf of the people. Makes me think that the first liturgists, back to this perichoresis or the Trinity, there were three liturgists. They're doing something on behalf of the human race.
Well, that. I'm sorry. Not to interrupt. That is some fantastic stuff. We're hitting the break right now, so I'm going to go ahead and send us to break, and we'll pick up with this when we get back. This is the Uncommon Good. We'll be back right after this. We're back with the Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr joining you this week. Thank you for listening to the show. We have a wonderful guest on the show, Bud. I'm going to kick it over to you to reintroduce him to everyone who's listening.
Yeah, our guest today is Dr. David Fagerberg. He's the Professor Emeritus of Liturgical Studies at Notre Dame. He's written a lot on the liturgy. His most recent book is entitled The Liturgical Cosmos. It's out by Emmaus, and you can pick it up wherever you buy your favorite books, including Divine Treasures here in Des Moines. Dr. Fagerberg, with the vagaries of radio, we sort of had to interrupt a point you were making at the end there. We were talking about the definition of liturgy, and you were saying, like, this isn't necessarily your own that you came up with, or even scholars who influenced you, but it has some pedigree in the church. So kicking that one back to you.
We should slip in this definition from paragraph 20 of Mediator Dei. Pius XII defines it this way: the sacred liturgy is the public worship which our Redeemer, as head of the church, renders to the Father. So Jesus is the premier liturgist, the first liturgist. He's our Redeemer, and he's the head of the church, and the sacred liturgy is what he renders to the Father. Second part of the sentence, as well as the worship which the community of the faithful renders to its founder. So liturgy is what Jesus renders to the Father, what the church renders to Jesus, and then the sentence finishes, and through him to the Heavenly Father. It is, in short, the worship rendered by the mystical body of Christ in the entirety of its head and members. Well, that's a rather heavier definition of liturgy than what we normally go for as a ritual activity created by us. Sometimes sentences appear on the screen, which I don't know if I'm responsible for. I'm typing along happily, and then a sentence appears, and this one appeared one day when I was writing. We know that liturgy is an opus Dei. It's the work of God. It's the work of God, even if it is the activity of human beings. Coleman O'Neill says about sacraments, God does something which the human being is not capable of doing. We're capable of putting water on a baby's head, of passing out the bread and wine, of smearing with oil. Then God does something of which we're not capable. So, but it's the work of God. Well, to me, that changes somewhat the pitch of the debate over good liturgy, bad liturgy. I don't know how I would feel about someone saying, let's see, the two classic purposes of liturgy running back before Thomas Aquinas has been to say it is for the glorification of God and the sanctification of man. In our liturgy, we try to glorify God and sanctify people. What do you do in your liturgy? Well, I hope that every liturgy does the same thing. And if you're thinking at a deeper sort of a level, then you could see it. It's going to take different expressions in different cultures at different centuries, and the church documents all admit this. But my curiosity is to get down to this level of liturgical theology and to think what's really transpiring in that liturgy.
Well, and part of what I think is interesting on that one is when you look at the definition of Pius XII that you brought up, two more things that your book gets to at the end. So you were the word render happened twice, right? What is rendered to the Father? What is rendered to the Founder? Which gets into what you are talking about when it comes to sacrifice. And then when you think of both Jesus as the first liturgist and then all of us as liturgists, it gets to that idea that you talk about as liturgical persons at the end. And so to me, that's a profound way to imagine, like you said, the horizon of some of these arguments is maybe we get down bunny trails that seem really important because obviously they're politically charged and things like this. But to ask what a sacrifice is in a world that is very alien to the concept of sacrifice, and then to talk about what it means to be a liturgical person, precisely because Christ himself was the first liturgical person. Those two elements that you bring up in your book, I hope will be something that when people read it, that it helps reorient maybe some of these discussions for them.
It'd be nice if people want to make this effort. In a way, I've always found it a little funny that I write books that I don't really expect Mrs. Murphy to read, but they're books defending Mrs. Murphy. Mm-hmm. So I'm happy if somebody wants to push through that. It was what I had to come through. I read that one of you is a convert, and I am also. I will say about myself that I'm a credo Catholic and not a cradle Catholic. It's all converts on this show. Yep, you're right. Okay. Like the radio says all the time, all stations. I wrote myself into Catholicism in chapter 5 of my dissertation. Dissertations don't usually have that kind of existential effect, but this one did because I was trying to figure out what liturgia meant. And the distinction made me think I've actually got a different ecclesiology going on here, which is also then the funny thing about liturgy. It's like the verb form of ecclesiology. To swim is a verb, swimmer is the noun. Liturgy is a verb, Christian is the noun. Do liturgy is to be a member of Christ's mystical body, to be taken up in his headship, to offer worship to him, which is then rendered to the Father. So the priesthood of the laity, the royal priesthood of the baptized, that makes perfect sense. A Vatican document said that the difference between the priesthood of the laity and the priesthood of the ordained minister is a difference not found in the priesthood of Christ. That's always one and indivisible. Neither is it a difference found in the sanctity to which the faithful are called, like priests are called to one degree and laity to another. Rather, the diversity exists at the mode of participation in the priesthood of Christ. So, the sacrifice that's made liturgically, sacramentally within the temple is a sacrifice that should be continued in one's life, in one's home, in one's street, in one's service to the neighbor. The liturgy is carried out of the temple and should continue through the week. You should be a daily liturgist who then returns to act out in an exceptional and ritual and sacramental way what should be a basic posture of every moment of your life. That's a butchered quotation from Robert Taft, which I could almost remember, but the basic posture of your daily life is accurate. So liturgy trains you, and then during the week you are trained for it. I think Augustine's definition of sacrifice is quoted in the Catechism, and I was searching my iPad for it. Faculty, professors, academics can't speak off the top of their head. They're always searching for the quote, which is somewhere stored around here. And Augustine has a definition of sacrifice, something like drawing closer to God in sanctity constantly. So every day there is this sacrifice. This is the oblation, a lifting up.
One of the ends of liturgy is to lead us deeper into contemplation. And Dr. Fagerberg, I can imagine some of our listeners listening to the conversation today, and they say, all that's being said about liturgy is amazing. And, I have this renewed interest and commitment into entering into the liturgy. But I'll be honest, contemplation can seem like an intimidating idea. Maybe it is reserved for certain elite in the church. But according to the understanding of the church fathers, it seems contemplation is meant to be an activity of every member of the church. Could you speak to how contemplation is meant for all of us?
I like to try to collect definitions of contemplation, and I haven't yet put them in a form. I think what I most find is to describe it as a gaze, a looking upon God. Equally so, I would say that contemplation is presenting yourself before God to be looked upon, to be God gazes at us, we gaze at him. That's an old definition, a story, an anecdote that came, I think, out of Germany. There was a pesky professor asking what this peasant did when he was at church and engaged in adoration of the sacrament. And he said, well, I look at God and he looks at me. That's why I'm here. I think that would be an appropriate definition of contemplation. I know it's supposed to come after meditation, and so have your scripture reading, give it 20 minutes each morning. This is what the authors say. But every once in a while, the car of meditation gets going so fast that it leaves the ground. It becomes an airplane and takes off. And then you're advised to set aside what you're chewing on and stay with it as long as the Holy Spirit gives it to you. Well, that's not reserved just to monks. That's something that all Christians should discover as they deepen their love for the incarnate Son of God. His hypostatic union was accomplished precisely so that he, the God-man, could invite us to become man-God, to be deified. And that's the final word in my definition of liturgy. The kenosis is God coming down to take us up into deification. Maximus, the confessor, said that God made us so we might become partakers of the divine nature, 2 Peter 1, and we might become like him, 1 John 3, by deification by grace. So God became man so that human beings could become God. Well, that's theology at work. True theology is adoration. It's adoration offered by the intellect, but also adoration offered by the affections. So you don't have to be well read in the, how many volumes of Augustine are there now? 300, 700?
A few of
50? You don't have to be well read in all of that in order to engage in this. You can also make your adoration. Evagrius of Pontus said that the theologian is one who prays, and one who prays is a theologian. Mrs. Murphy is a theologian. I don't know if she knows it, and that's why I was writing my books. This Liturgical Cosmos you discovered is a collection of essays over 2 or 3 decades of writings, and when I pulled them together, I didn't organize them chronologically, but thematically. But I discovered this kind of steady, slow layout. The Trinity's circulation of love turns itself inside out. The Son and the Spirit work the Father's good pleasure for all creation. And that pleasure of the Father is to invite our assent to participate in the very life of God. That can't be forced. It has to be done with our cooperation. And that's what my definition means. I joked in summer class once that nobody's noticing this, so I was going to have T-shirts made, and some wag at the end of the summer had one printed up. It's in the drawer down the hallway from me. I haven't actually produced hundreds of them to wear around town, but yeah, nice definition.
Well, nice. If we could help with the T-shirt industry, just let us know. You know, we're entrepreneurs.
There you
no.
We'll start it in Iowa. That's the home base.
So I know I'll be showing my Benedictine Oblate card by saying this about silence. Contemplation. The contemplation's rooted in silence of the will, that we sort of allow. You know, because when we're meditating, like you were saying, we use our minds to sort of direct our will and think, will, this is what you should desire, right? And we're going to think about these things. And contemplation, an act of the Holy Spirit, on one hand, is where we sort of let go of the reins, and not only are we not thinking of things, but we're not even willing things on our own. God takes over, so as it were, and takes the chariot wheels in his own hands. So to wrap this up, because we have about 4 minutes here, that seems to me something that, as you're pointing out, plainclothes people in the pews at the liturgy, you don't have to be like a member of a very distinct system of mystical thought. I mean, it's great if you have the free time, of course, to read all of this wonderful work that the church has put out. But the liturgy, when it's approached with that humility and simplicity of, so to speak, handing the reins over to God to direct our heart where we want to go, that seems to me the what your book ultimately is hoping for when the readers approach it.
It is. I hadn't thought of quite making the connection with that word, but you've planted the seed for an article. Liturgy and contemplation, liturgical contemplation. I'm reading right now, for the last 5 years or so, a group of Catholic spiritual authors whom I neglected for my whole career. I read patristics, Greek and Latin. I read medieval scholastics and monastics. I had to read a lot of modern junk to do my job, but I never read much from the Catholic spiritual writers from 1500 to 1900. And they've been smuggling their way in to my understanding. I didn't like them because they felt too stern, too harsh, kind of dramatic and over fussy. They felt to me like a literary form of Baroque architecture. Well, now it's begun from Fenelon up to Lieberman. And they introduced me to others, friends introducing me to other friends. So I'm just finishing a little book from the 17th century by a man named Rigaluche, who I found because somebody said he was one of the favorites of Bossuet. And his definition is as follows: meditation is conversational prayer. You don't have to be a PhD to do that. Have your conversation with God. which disposes the soul to affective prayer, heart prayer, where the will acts more than the understanding. And then contemplation is a simple sight of God accompanied by holy love and veneration. Well, veneration, liturgy, liturgizing God, entering a holy alliance that renders us capable of honoring God with a worship worthy of himself. Again, quotations from this fellow. So I'm reading all of this spiritual material with a liturgical lens, the world through the lens of the liturgy. Now, my current project is this Western spirituality through the lens of liturgy. I call them theologians of abnegation, because they're all trying to understand what Jesus meant by deny yourself in order to be my disciple.
That is
so the ascetic.
Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt. I got to interrupt there because we're hitting the hard cutoff.
You're out.
But yeah, that is. I'm looking forward to that book. Real quick, just so everybody knows that I'm not plagiarizing. I think liturgical contemplation I'm stealing from the Maritanes. I think they might have wrote a book. Anyway, people go look that up. But just one more time, I want to say thank you to Dr. David Fagerberg. The book is The Liturgical Cosmos, The World Through the Lens of the Liturgy, Emmaus Academic, and like you said, you can look it up nearly anywhere. Dr. Fagerberg, thank you for coming on the show.
My pleasure. It was fun.
This is The Uncommon Good, and we'll be back right after this. Back with The Uncommon Good, Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr joining you this week. Thank you for listening to the show. Be that on the live airwaves on Iowa Catholic or on iowacatholicradio.com or Iowa Catholic Radio app. And then, of course, our beautiful, wonderful, great podcast listeners. Thank you for listening to the show. Bud, that was a fantastic adventure, I would even say, through the liturgy. I do hope people enjoyed the interview, but I hope they get a chance to go read more from Dr. Fagerberg.
Yeah, it's one of those conversations where I'd like to go back and re-listen with my notepad handy. He's just one of those profs, like there's so much substance there. It was just like kind of dropping so many truth bombs that it was hard to keep up with it all. But speaking of, no, I don't have a segue there. If you'd like to join us in our prayer life.
I mean, that is a truth bomb.
Yeah.
It is truly the case.
This is true. If you want to join us in our prayer life here at the radio station, we broadcast the Rosary on air. 6 a.m. and 10 a.m., so each morning. And then later in the afternoon, 2:55 p.m., we pray together the Chaplet of Divine Mercy. You can use the Iowa Catholic Radio app to pray the Rosary anytime, anywhere.
And I mean, look, we're hoping, I'm hoping somewhere this is playing out loud, like in a boom box in the state fair. So if you have a chance to listen to this before you hit up the state fair, make sure to hit the Iowa Catholic Radio booth that is there. Otherwise, we have a few events always that you can check on iowacatholicradio.com, the events that are in and around both the Diocese of Des Moines, but also, of course, the whole Iowa Catholic Radio listening area. So in Des Moines on August 22nd at 7:30 in the Tea Room, Core Night, an evening of fellowship hosted by the Basilica of St. John Knights of Columbus that aims to form and strengthen Catholic men in faith and virtue as missionary disciples. Drinks will be available at 7:30 and the panel discussion at 8. August 31st at the Jasper Winery in Des Moines, Mary's Meal Concert. September 8th at West Des Moines at noon, the Man Up West Power Lunch. And then, of course, the big one, St. Joseph Catholic Church, Bud, on October 10th in Winterset has Joe Heschmeyer coming. That's another one to go check out. And then finally, of course, December 8th in Des Moines, 6 p.m. at the Embassy Suites downtown. Dinner in December with David Anders. Make sure to check out iowacatholicradio.com to sign up or find out more about those events. And then, of course, please keep in mind that this is a ministry. It's not just the people on air behind the desks or behind the boards. This doesn't happen without you. Your time and your talent, and certainly your prayers, but also your treasure makes this happen as well. So if you are so inclined, please make sure to donate to Iowa Catholic Radio, and you can do that on at iowacatholicradio.com on the donate button, or 515-223-1150 to chat with some folks, or even maybe you can text them and get in touch with them that way to donate to this wonderful ministry here at Iowa Catholic Radio. But, it was a state for a weekend. We didn't really get to even talk about it very much. That goes to show you how impressive the interview that we were doing with Dr. Fagerberg was. But I do hope that people get to enjoy Iowa in August as a lot cooler than the rest of the country. And also, they got a chance to stop by and see people at the Iowa Catholic Radio table.
I'm personally pretty proud. That's a lot of P's. I'm proud of the Iowa State Fair. I know it gets a lot of pub, but I think it really is. It's a great way to experience the culture of the state, to get some tasty food. We're known, I feel like that when I talk to people out of state, like the state fair, Ragbri.
Yeah.
Ragbri I've got to build up to. I want to do Ragbri someday. And then thirdly, for this radio show.
There you go. It's those three.
That's it.
Well, I think we all got to work for John Leonetti getting a butter statue. But until then, this is the Uncommon Good. May Jesus Christ, the Prince of Peace, reign in our hearts, family, city, state, nation, world, solar system, galaxy, the whole kit and caboodle. This is the Uncommon Good, and we'll be back next week.
The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr is heard every week on wonderful Catholic stations like this one, and anytime on podcast. Just search for The Uncommon Good.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio and The Uncommon Good provided by Mercy College of Health Sciences. Learn more at mchs.edu.